Hello, everyone. Welcome. I love seeing the panelists start or the attendees start to show up and seeing so many familiar names. I wish I could be seeing your faces in John's place at APT, but this is our next best way to connect. I'd love to invite Jimmy DeVita to pop on his camera because I'm sure you'd love to see his face. Hi, Jim. Jim is Brenda DeVita's office at APT. Welcome everyone. This is our second Beyond the Plays talk. Last week we had a wonderful conversation with Khalid Long about Katori Hall's The Mountaintop. And today we're here talking to Jim DeVita about his new play, which is currently playing up the hill, an Improbable Fiction. I just want to start before we get into the conversation by saying thank you. I see you all. I see your names out there. You've been with us during this incredibly challenging year, and we are overwhelmed by your generosity. And you've buoyed us in ways that I can't begin to share. So thank you. We have two plays playing for human beings right now. Katori Hall's A Mountaintop and Jim DeVita's beautiful play, An Improbable Fiction. There are tickets available. Please, if you're able to and feel comfortable to come and gather, it is a beautiful feeling to be in those theaters watching stories again. And we also have partnered with HMS Video. If you're not able to get to us or not able to get tickets on the times that you're available to be with us, you can see those. They are not movies. They are live captured performances. We got as close as we could to making it feel like you were here. So you can get those through our website or box office. And we're rehearsing other plays. We are immediately, Jimmy has to leave us at 10:45. I'm supposed to, at 11:45, we have a hard stop because he is currently rehearsing an Iliad, which is going to be our next round. So we're going to have to let him go so he can get to rehearsal. And we're also rehearsing Tom Stoppard's Rough Crossing, which is a delightful, buoyant, bubbly, ridiculous comedy that follows the two that are up now. So that's my business. Now I want to use all of our time to talk to Jimmy about his work. It is my great pleasure to introduce one of my favorite people in the world and a true multi-hyphenate human. Fisherman, dad, actor, you may know. He's also okay at that job. Novelist, playwright, James DeVita. I want to read a little bit about his writing life because some of you may not be aware of how long he's been doing this and how much he has actually written. So along with his novels, A Winsome Murder, and I'm waiting, Jimmy, for the next mystery, which is a wonderful novel, The Silenced and Blue. Jimmy's worked extensively as a playwright for young audiences as well as for adult audiences. His work has been acknowledged with the Distinguished Play Award from the American Alliance of Theater and Education, the Intellectual Freedom Award by the Kentucky Council of Teachers of English and Language Arts, and the Schubert Fendrick Memorial Playwriting Contest, and the American Alliance of Theater and Education also honored his body of work with the Charlotte B. Shorpening Award. He's also the playwright in residence at First Stage in Milwaukee for more than 20 years. Jim's adult plays, also including our play that we're producing right now, An Improbable Fiction. He has written, and they have been produced, Christmas in Babylon, which was produced in Milwaukee a few years ago, Learning to Stay, which Forward Theater did just a few years ago, Gift to the Magi, which we produced here at APT, a wonderful chamber musical based on the O. Henry story, Enacting Shakespeare, with James also acted in, The Desert Queen, which Sarah Day was beautiful in, about the life of Gertrude Bell, Dickens in America, Lakeview, Waiting for Vern. And he's also been the recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellowship for Fiction. His children's plays, classic titles for youth and family. I have to tell you, you should go to his website because you will be shocked by the number of works he's produced over the years. And I'm going to stop talking and ask you a question.
You've been around for a while.
You've been around for a while doing this, Jim. Yeah. And I'd love to start with the sort of broader view of the when. When did you start exploring writing as an outlet as well as acting? Or did that come first? I'm asking questions I don't know the answers to, which is always exciting when I've known you as long as I have.
Yeah, almost nothing I do is, I don't know how I got where I am, but the only thing is, the first thing I ever wanted to be was a writer in sixth grade. I remember I have a a little post on my wall still from my sixth grade teacher, Mrs. Boyd, who said, perhaps you'll be a writer someday. Because I used to love, I loved book reports. I used to do, and I used to put them in covers like construction paper. I remember when I would bind them with yarn and make little books. So I do know that was the first thing I wanted to do. I wanted to be a journalist when I was in junior high. So I wrote since I can remember, like fifth, sixth grade, I started writing. But I never showed anything I ever wrote until I was 30 years old.
Really?
Yeah. That was the first play that I wrote. So that's just a little nugget that I knew it was in there. But I put it aside, and I'm not trained as a writer, and I had to get past all that noise about who am I to write. Nobody would ever read anything I wrote, which I still have today, but I'm better at shutting that off.
I think it's interesting that predated your interest in theater. So your writing was more about journalism, or when did you start imagining stories as opposed to reporting on things?
I think that came later. That came when I started reading. I loved to read when I was a kid. I was a quiet kid and I read a lot. I used to go to story hour at the library, and mom would just drop you off there all day, and it was fine by me. But I do remember when I started getting older and I started reading, I remember the Once and Future King, which are the Arthurian tales. And then I started to get really interested, and I started reading a lot of classic children's literature, Robin Hood and Treasure Island and all these adventure things. And I was a fisherman as a kid. So like, Stevenson's like Kidnapped on the boats. And so I started loving all that stuff. And then I really didn't start writing. Like the first thing I tried to write was right out of school in Milwaukee. I was an actor then. It's a long story how I got into that, but I wrote the first play because I didn't have any work as an actor. And I got out of school, and I remember I read somewhere like every actor should have a one-person show, which is true, because you can take it to you could just make a living. You could take it to libraries, take it to, wherever you can think, classrooms. And so I tried to get one that was published, and they were all, you had to pay for them, and I didn't have any money. And
now you're happy because they have to pay for yours, but
yes. And I had one job then. I remember it was $68 a week in a children's theater I was working. So I had no money. So because I had to pay, I look back through all my old writings. I kept journals all my life, these things that I told you I never showed anybody. And I was looking for something. And so I found a few monologues that seemed to like connect, like pieces I wrote. And I started putting this thing together, and I wrote my first play, which was called Waiting for Vern, which is a funny little play.
I really want to read all this now.
Yeah, I actually just read it recently. It's not half bad, I don't think. With 30 years looking back. It was kind of my ode to Waiting for Godot, was Waiting for Vern.
Okay, now I really want to hear it.
And the gist of it, the elevator pitch is this: two actors show up for a two-person reading of a new play, and the other actor doesn't show up.
Vern.
So I have to like vamp until he shows. And that becomes the evening, Waiting for Vern, who is the other actor.
I think, of course, I want to read it. I also want to go back to what you said about the stories that engaged you as a young person, because you ended up adapting a lot of, like you mentioned some titles of plays of yours I have read, that you're interested in Arthurian legend and the Stevenson and those adventure stories. So adapting those stories into plays was sort of your way in when you began?
Yeah, very much so. It's a funny story, but I've been with First Stage, and I credit First Stage with giving me my first chance as a writer, because I had no track record. I had written this one play, and I actually performed that one, Waiting for Vern. It was kind of successful. So I thought maybe I could write. So I was right out of school, classically trained. I was waiting to do Hamlet. And I got called into First Stage to audition to play Bambi, to play the role.
Oh my God.
Bambi.
I want to see some right now. Did you get the role? Did you get the job?
I go in there. This is the long story short. And again, like I'm just filled with, all this stuff. And Rob Goodman, who was running at the time, says, I'm interested in you because I'm small. If you don't know me, most of you do. I'm small of stature. So think of me 30 years ago. I look like a little boy. So it's great for Bambi. And I kind of respectfully said, I think not. I was just respectfully kind of declining. I wasn't really. He said, have you ever read the novel? and I never read the novel.
Uh-huh.
And I went home and read the novel, and I wanted to adapt that book right away. It's a brilliant, frightening, moving, kind of young adult bridge. It's nothing like whatever we think of when we think of Bambi, when we think of the movie,
The
which
movie, right?
yeah, they bought the underlying story rights, is what they called it. So, like, there's no thumper. And that was my first sentence when I
Let's just say that
when I
right up.
tried to sell the play afterwards. My query letter was, the first sentence was, "There is no thumper." And so it's a beautiful, moving book about life and death and family and man and nature. And it was, and war was happening in the world at that time. So it's filled with all these amazing things. And all we kind of came down to know is the Disney version, which is great, but it's not the book.
That's so true. Often of classical literature that gets adapted and those films get in our heads. I think what's interesting about this work of yours that I've read, and your work as a dramaturg, you're not aware, our audience, that Jimmy operates as our literary manager and dramaturg, reads a lot of plays for us to decide what we're going to produce. And also thematically what runs through the plays that you continually champion, because Jimmy, you really champion a play when you champion it, is the lack of cynicism and heart, that there's an open-heartedness to your work. And I'd love to spend some time talking about the play that we're here to talk about, and Improbable Fiction. Both I'd like to start, because there's so much heart in this play, and it's central stories of friendship and camaraderie and what we need from and for each other, and how that came out of this particular moment. So I'd love to ask, how did this play, I mean, how, why, when, what was the germinating thought, and how did it grow?
Yeah, well, it kind of happened by accident, a little bit. I mean, the idea did. And I remember I was on the porch with my wife, and we were anyway, there's this stuff kept on coming out on social media, and it was all about what Shakespeare wrote during the plague. And he wrote King Lear, and he wrote the Scottish play. And a lot of people were inspired by that. And there were another group of people like myself were like, "Oh, just shut up. Okay, I don't care what the genius Shakespeare did. Stop
just trying to get up every day."
It was just belittling. And to be honest, I, kind of depressed and just lazy. It was the first few months of the, never imagined that we'd be canceling our season. So that kind of grief, dealing with that. And I usually write every day, just no matter, even if I'm not commissioned, I'm usually writing something, and had nothing to get my juices going. And Brenda had mentioned something, you should try and write something. And I said, and for some, I don't even know where it happened, but somewhere we said, I should write a play about actors out of work, like we are right now. And I was kind of pissy about it, to be honest with you. And then the idea, no, I should write like a bunch of characters in a bar, Shakespeare characters in a bar, and they're out of work, they're in a plague. And then it was like, hey, that's kind of interesting. So it kind of happened by accident. And then as ideas happen, I kept thinking about that. It's kind of interesting. And then I came up with this kind of crazy improbable fiction about writing about Shakespeare's characters stuck in a bar during the plague, out of work. That was the germ of the idea.
And the characters, like when you were, it's sort of like throwing, sometimes interviews are like, who would you have at your imaginary dinner party? And it's all, they could be alive or dead. So when you're imagining this group of characters, how did you choose who would, once the story started taking shape, who would be invited to the party?
Well, it's funny in a way I didn't choose, and not to be too artsy about it, but in my imagination, as I was writing, the door knocked and I opened it, and it was Othello. And then I kept writing, and then the door knocked, and I was as interested as anybody else to wonder who's going to come in the door next.
I have not heard you say that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. So I didn't say I want to use this character. I just, depending on what was happening on stage, and it isn't so artsy. Your imagination has all these characters in there from 30 years doing Shakespeare. And so the characters just kind of showed up at the door. And my director, Tim O'Sell, who was wonderful to work on with the new play, helped me a lot. But he was the one to point out, no Iagos showed up, or no Edmonds showed up, or none of the darker, for lack of a better word, evil characters. which I've played most of my life. None of those guys came to the door, but these other characters. So that's funny. So it's the imagination, you know.
I know that in your conversations with Tim, there was a particular illustration. If our audience may have seen your Dickens in America, where the character of Charles Dickens plays a bunch of the characters he's written. So talk about that illustration, because I think it's such an interesting departure.
Yeah, it's called a Dickens Dream. And so I wrote Dickens in America many years ago. I'm losing track now. For APT and for Jim Ridge. And I found this thing about Charles Dickens, and it was his son's description of his father working. And he said that he always thought that that the characters in his father's imagination kind of had a life of their own. And his dad, Charles Dickens, would complain that they want to work out the story the way they want to do it. They don't want to do it the way I want. And this particular illustration has Charles Dickens asleep at his desk, and all the characters from all his plays, like 60 different characters, yammering at him, pay attention to me, or I don't want to do that. Or so he talked about losing control of his story and or giving over to it, which I think is what he embraced, to let the characters go where they want. And it's an odd paradox. Of course you have control, but of course you don't if you let it go.
There are themes of that throughout Improbable Fiction as well. That the idea that these characters are aware that there is an author, there's a sort of wonderful meta feeling about the thing. Anybody who's here with us on a Saturday morning, we're all kind of geeks about this stuff.
Yeah.
So it speaks, and we kept talking about this play as a Valentine to the audience, because we were able to, I think I'd like to ask, these characters that knocked and you answered the door are embodied in this production by actors who have played those roles for our audience.
Yeah.
So I'd love to talk a little bit about, because the play has changed a lot. We did it initially as a Zoom reading as part of our Zoom series. And what we're seeing on stage is it has really grown from that point. So can I talk a little bit about the actors in those roles and the characters, what kind of overlap there is there in your imaginative world, how that helped grow the play?
Well, it definitely grew. It didn't start out like that, because to be honest, when I wrote it, I just wrote the play. I had no idea that it would be done on Zoom. I just wrote it for myself, as I am wont to do at times. Had no idea a year later it would be produced at APT. And I didn't want to do it on Zoom at first, because we'd never heard of Zoom. I didn't even hear it. What's Zoom?
I know, it's so weird that it's a colloquialism now.
So I had just written a play which I thought had some promise. And I wouldn't want to get it on this electronic thing. I didn't know what was going to happen, is go anywhere. So I had all those fears, and I said no at first. And then my friends and colleagues said, no, you should do this, think of it like a workshop. And then I actually I was lucky enough that APT, the actors that they hired to do it was some of the actors that actually played the roles. So I didn't choose those, when I first wrote it, I didn't know I would have the actors that had played those roles. So so the woman playing Juliet played Juliet, and the woman playing Cleopatra played Cleopatra. So once I knew that, then my imagination started put them in the roles. So the movie, I call it the movie in my head, now had physical, real people in the roles.
I made up that. It's so funny how much I make up, having not actually asked you that question, because as we all know, Shakespeare wrote for his company. So in my head, I've seen the play a lot now, and I'm excited. I got to see the understudy cast do the play. So for me, it had always been in the mouth of Tracy and in Sarah and Melissa and Chike and Brian particularly, but being able to see other actors play those parts,
must be interesting. Yeah.
Oh, it's great. It made me think of the legs the play could have. That doesn't just belong to this company, it's of this company, but it's a play that is being played beautifully by our understudies, which is really exciting. Yeah, but I had imagined that as the play grew and these artists were in those roles, how did the play change shape because of their perspectives or points of view, or did Tim Like, I'm interested in that collaborative world that playwriting has, as opposed to, say, when you're writing on a novel, you'll have an editor who gives her points of view, but the theater is such a collaborative process. How did that shift and change for you?
Oh gosh, changed a great deal. So I run a really collaborative room as a writer, and sometimes it gets away from you, but it's the messiness is good. So there's not an actor in the play that didn't contribute in some way. And Tim also, once I knew that I had the act, and of course, let me just say, I didn't know I had those actors at first, but my experience of those roles in Shakespeare are those actors playing them.
Right.
So the choices I made were still informed by the wonderful performances I saw by these actors.
Mm-hmm.
Then I actually had them, and then I could just like run with that.
Mm-hmm.
But we had many a conversation with I remember in my backyard with Melissa Pereira. We were looking at Juliet and talking about discussing things we wanted to bring out. That my friend and colleague Gavin Lawrence, who did the original Zoom, he's not in the production now. We met and talked about the play. Tim has been with me since the beginning, and we talked every morning for like 3 months just about when we were preparing for this rewriting, and so. Yeah, so everybody contributes to at least the way that I work. Everybody contributes, and you never know where the great idea is going to come from, and many of those great ideas come from little unknown moments. That what'd you say over there?
Uh-huh.
That so, and I think that's fun too, and I think it gives everybody ownership of the play, and that stakeness in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes about the thing that we're making. So it's not so much Jimmy's idea about a play or Tim's or the actors. It's like this, I call it this thing in between all of us. And how can we make that thing the best that it can be?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's a very collaborative project.
Another thing that I think is really unique and interesting about this play, because harkening back to something you said earlier about 30 years of doing Shakespeare, of having the privilege of being steeped in those words, many productions of each of these plays, the words, and in your novel, in Winsome Murder, the detective also is visited by the words of Shakespeare. And so I'm curious about how much of this play is Shakespeare's language that's really unique.
Yeah. I'm guessing, but I'm thinking at least 80%, maybe even a little more, it's all Shakespeare, taken out of context from every different place. So every character speaks everything. So Othello has some of Iago's lines, has some of Falstaff's lines, has some of Cleopatra speaks Hamlet's lines in different contexts. So one of the things we said, like, nobody is quoting Shakespeare in the play. So none of these characters are aware that they're using a line from Hamlet. They're just expressing themselves, and they happen to use those words then.
I feel like that one of the ways this play is rewarding, deeply rewarding for those of us who are Shakespeare lovers, is that for a while they feel like they use that term Easter eggs. I'm not sure, but because they just appear, and there's some part of your brain that is filled with the familiarity of those. I don't get caught up with where's that from at all. It just sort of pings. Like I understand that Cleopatra needs those words of Henry V or whoever it is that's coming out of her mouth, because it's so connected to the truth of the moment. Brenda described watching a play with some folks she felt from some young people who might have been from the Young Shakespeare Players in Madison, who do these full uncut productions, and how it can be really delicious if you are a theater nerd and a Shakespeare nerd to be able to be like, oh, that's Royalist and Cressida.
Yeah.
Timon of Athens there.
Yeah, it's a double edge on that. My intention is for the play to work on both levels. If you happen to know a lot, it's just an extra little for the nerds like us, these little jewels that you get. And my hope is that the play, that you don't have to know Shakespeare at all, and you will understand the play and just take it for what it is. And that if we're aware that I'm quoting something, then I've failed as the playwright, because the characters don't know they're quoting. They're just expressing their heart with these words. And I think we've been pretty successful at that. We took pains to not make it too clever,
Yeah.
which can happen when you do things like this. And I had a lot of stuff that I cut along, killing you darlings, as they call it. I'd start
Oh
getting,
gosh.
no, it sounds like you can hear what I'm trying to do there. So we would snip all of those. And so we try in this fantastical world, of course, to try and keep it truthful in this fiction.
The narrative is really the story between those characters.
Yeah.
And it's I think really interesting to see those words be able to work so many ways.
Yeah, it's kind of the brilliance of Shakespeare, of course.
Yeah. We've seen, if you're lucky enough to have seen a lot of Hamlets, we've seen how the story can change based on who is saying those words, who's inhabiting them. But to actually see the words themselves mean different things, push a different narrative, was part of what's really, it just deepens my love both for this play and for Shakespeare's words, how they're able to do that.
Yeah, it was like, when I was writing it, the plot and narrative of this story. I'm fortunate because I've had 30 years of Shakespeare in my head. So, but I would say, well, I would know I needed the character to express something, and I've said, I know there's something in somewhere from there. There's something in Henry about that. So then I would Google Henry with just like 2 or 3 words from the idea I had and track down. And it's like, oh yeah, I can use that. And I would either use it verbatim, or sometimes, and I would adapt it or change a word or two or paraphrase it. But I'd say a good deal is verbatim Shakespeare, simply in different contexts and different mouths of humans, which is kind of fun,
Yeah. I'm mindful of the time, and I know that I could keep chatting. This is my favorite thing to do, Jimmy, to chat with you about your work. But I want to just invite again, we lose Jimmy in 15 minutes. So to be able to have an opportunity, if you have questions, to pop them in the Q&A, and that we can share your thoughts and questions with Jimmy. I'm also interested in, and I know that we talked a little bit about not really wanting to do this on Zoom, but I was talking to Jake about this moment in time, how we as an industry have had to find ways to stay creative, that this being one of very few new productions across the country that was born in Zoom and is moving to the stage.
Yeah.
What we've seen a lot of,
I never thought of that.
Right? And that is, who could have even imagined 2 years ago that we'd use the word Zoom, or that a work of art could be born in this digital imperfect medium and then grow to be on the stage.
I look at it now, like I was so fortunate to get, because I forget how long, I think we rehearsed, I don't know if it was 2 weeks.
I think we may have had 2 weeks on it because we were imagining it as a workshop.
Yeah, so for me, it was like I got a 2-week workshop with professional actors and a professional director, got to hear a reading of it publicly, which is great because it's very hard to get as a playwright. And it's not like they're not knocking at your door to do that unless you're maybe famous, but I don't have that opportunity all the time. So then and then I got to go away and rewrite. And then I was fortunate enough, we still didn't know it was ever going to be a production. And I was very fortunate that happened too.
I think we all knew it was going to be a production. You may have not allowed yourself to think, but you're like, when do we get to put this on our stage? And that this story with these loved and familiar actors and characters are opening our season after this, our pandemic is. So we do have a question about whether you were involved in the directing of the play at all.
I was not involved in the directing of the play at all, except I do give input. I call it armchair directing a little bit. But Tim Osell, who directed it, he's a wonderful director. He's very collaborative too. So I would always try and keep it in the script because I'm a director too. So I'm very careful about what I say. That's not how I would do it or my taste, but I would try and keep it about the script. And so I would collaborate with him all the time. And I think with the words here, I think, so that's all my input would come from the words and some of my experience, but I just, but basically I like to give the director, total control over that because he's looking from a different perspective, which I need too, because I'm too immersed in the thing.
And you've worked with Tim as an actor quite a few times. So you're deeply familiar with each other's rhythms and we had a great coach on this, Adrian Moore as well, who when I talked to her as she was leaving, felt very connected to and excited by that process about, because she's a verse and text coach and she is immersed in Shakespeare's words too, to be able to use her expertise to highlight the Shakespearean, how hard some of that language is to get clear, that image work.
Yeah, so we're like she and we're working on the ideas of the play more. If I feel the idea is not getting communicated, and, those are the things we can kind of communicate to Tim, and then he, if he agrees, he would figure out how to make that clear or stage that so it's clear. So
you have, though, I mean, just to speak to that point, directed your own work before.
Have I? What did I direct?
You did. You did a gorgeous adaptation of Cyrano, which you directed.
That's right.
And the Gertrude Bell story, Desert Queen, you directed.
Yeah.
So that must be a very different experience as well, because you can say, oh, gosh, that writer really should have helped me out there, or that director is screwing up my play. When you're both.
But luckily, both of those, I'm working from amazing resource material. The original material is really good. So it's still like that. That adaptive work in that is very little of my original writing in that. It's more adapting, and so I'm working with really good material there.
Yeah, I would say so in this case as well, right? Why not use the great stuff?
Yeah.
There was a question about whether the Zoom version will be available. It is no longer available. It was available for a short period. We do have, as I mentioned, the current version available to stream as long as this play is playing up the hill. But that's one of the things when Jimmy talked about being nervous that this thing is out there, this thing that's not cooked yet, it's still working. We wanted the audience who was able to see that to be part of that process, but then the actors also feel that stuff living out there in the world when you're just in play practice mode is not something that feels like a finished product. So it was just a process.
And we've had substantial revisions from that. So I wouldn't want that to be the one that's living out there. And the one, is it available this weekend, the streaming?
It is. Yep. It's available now through the closing of the play.
Which is not a Zoom, which is a 3-camera professional filmed performance, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. It is 3 cameras. We shot 2 different performances. It has been edited, but it feels, as we said, it feels like you're up the hill.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I think we put in the chat the link to the film version. Those of you who chat. We have a question about whether or not you put stage directions in the script, whether the script is published or available.
The script actually is published and available. You can get it either through our gift shop or Arcadia Books, which is our little bookstore in town. I would love to support them. So if you could go to Arcadia.
So do you include stage directions in that version?
Yes, I do. I have lots of stage directions, and they changed, of course. And I always put stage directions, and then when I get into the theater, I tell the actors and the director, you can disregard any stage direction you want. But I give that as a blueprint to start from. So even if the director and actor don't particularly want to do that stage direction, they know there's something there that I think is needed. Right. So there may be different ways to fulfill that moment, so I'm not attached to that. I'm not very precious about my writing. But it does give them a hint that something happens here, because most stage directions are taking up a moment to what we call a beat or a pause, or something is happening in there. So yes, so there's quite a few directions in there that are still, because a lot of them I adapt as I watched rehearsals. I stole the actors' stage directions, put them in there, and told them they get no credit for that.
No credit at all. No royalties for that throwing yourself over the table moment. Sarah Young put the link to Arcadia Books in the chat, so you're able to order that book online, the play online, if you'd like.
Thank you.
And this is another interesting question, sort of aside, about Book of Will, which Tim O'Sell directed, which was which did have some of Shakespeare's language in it, in that wonderful, here we're using all the words all the time, LaShawn Banks going line to line in Shakespeare. But the question was, what was that? How was that? I mean, if you can put your actor hat on for a second, how was that experience, the Book of Will experience? I will, just because I have to say, the moment of you and Jim Ridge sitting on the edge of that stage, talking about grief, I'm going to cry thinking about it right now. I saw that play as much as I could because that felt like another moment that for those of us who are APT super fans, and I have the privilege of working here, get to see you and Jim, after all the years we've seen you, sit there and talk about your life in the theater. So this play, Improbable Fiction, also feels like our life in the theater, but that Book of Will did as well, Lauren Gunderson's play.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I mean, I got to be in a play about a man who gave me a career. When I think about it, I've been doing this almost 30 years here, and before that too. And why his language as a young boy on a fishing boat, I don't know why to this day I heard that language and it stopped me, and I wanted to know more about it. And I've always said I don't think Shakespeare felt anything more than any of us ever feel. He just had the words to express it for some reason. So like that moment of grief, to use that language to, if you want to know, there's almost any emotion, anything you experience in life, you can find in Shakespeare's words. And at least for my opinion, puts it better than I ever could. And that's why when I watch it and I hear it, I recognize it, because that whatever that human thing is, I felt that. I've never been able to tell anybody what that felt like, but that's it.
Do you remember? I mean, go to Jimmy's website. It's Words, 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 right, Jim?
Yeah.
Because there's a wonderful.
I'm sorry. It's jamesdevita.com.
Okay, jamesdevita.com. You should take a look, because there's a wonderful picture of you holding a big fish. And I imagine when you said that, why was this kid on a fishing boat? Do you remember what those words were? What Shakespeare, way back? What are they? What were the words that
I was going? I just remember because I was, and this is, I don't know, maybe I was 15, because it was before I was even on the fishing boats. And I was going out to a wedding from my cousin in Brooklyn. We're a big Italian family. And I remember we were leaving because I had a suit on and the TV was on in the basement. And I was going up and there was this guy on TV doing this really big kind of yelling speech. And I don't know why I stopped. And I said, what the hell is that? And I looked at it and I didn't know what it was at the time, but I found out later. It was Derek Jacobi doing the rogue and peasant slave speech from Hamlet. And I have no idea why this 15-year-old kid was like, what is that? That's kind of cool. And I've gone back and watched that a few times, and it is a wonderful speech, and he does it well. But it was a very young Derek Jacobi. And that was the first time I ever heard it. And I have no idea to this day why poetry started to interest me, or language. And it's kind of started there. And then it grew over the years. And then when I was in community college, I have no idea why, but I think I wanted because it felt ungraspable to me. And
the challenge of that,
well, I couldn't understand a lot of it at first, to be honest with you. It's like but I wanted to, and I couldn't. And the more I learned, I think the more that it's not inaccessible. And it's been a lot of my work is trying to better, lesser degrees or more of trying to make that language accessible to everybody. As we all know, he wrote for the groundlings. He didn't write for the court. He included the court in there, but the groundlings and everybody else. And so I love to be welcomed inside of that. Like it wasn't just for the smart people.
Yeah.
Because I didn't consider myself one of the smart people. And it was like they had this thing. That's no fair.
I get it. Mine too.
Yeah, I want it too. And
there's a wonderful. I've seen your Shakespeare. I mean, when you direct Shakespeare, but also David Frank, our former producing artistic director, who gave us all so much access to, like, I don't know, what he knows and can say about Shakespeare. There's just no end to his knowledge, but his focus on image, like he would say, just be brave enough to literally play that image. Just let those words infuse your imagination, then the audience will. So in that Rogue and Peasant Slave, do you remember, that play very, very well. What about that speech? Was it his passion? Was it the words next to each other? We're thinking about the words themselves.
Yeah. I think it was a combination of both. I do remember the kind of passion of it because I remember it was the moment where he says basically revenge. It's huge theatrical, and then there's a shift right after that, which is,
Huh?
oh, what an ass am I?
Yeah.
And he was just like a guy talking, and it's like, so it was all this poetry and big stuff, and then all of a sudden I understood him more, and I was really intrigued at what that was because all of a sudden, and it's a great moment for any actor doing that, of how overwrought you can get and honest and overwrought and then call yourself on your own crap. And it's such a wonderful little moment into an insight into a human being in that play.
I think of that 15-year-old Jimmy too, because that feels to me like one of the more teenage moments in Hamlet, when we let ourselves get that passion of youth and being, and if injustice, there's nobody who feels injustice like a 15-year-old. There's something about that connection. I mean, of course, it's a brilliant
Yeah,
speech.
and I think I was very quiet as a kid, not very expressive, and so it's always kind of ironic that I found myself in a career of learning how to express both vocally and with written word and words, talking. And I think I was attracted to people that could do that, like to express their hearts like that, because we expressed nothing as where I grew up. You didn't say anything, good or bad. It was kind of neutral. So to find I think that's why I was pulled to this thing that I didn't have.
I love that they all belong. Those words, when you said, I want that too, that's mine, that they belong to you in a way I know very few people who have ownership over those words, because they are, as you said, and in your novel, those words continue to inform everything you do, those words next to each other. We have just like 3 more minutes before you have to go use a lot of Homer's words. So I like, talk about great work. We are, I can answer are we using any of the Book of Will set? We're not. This is an entirely new set. It's also designed by Nate Stuber, who designed the set for Book of Will. So you will see commonality. He's an artist who has certain stuff he enjoys doing. So it will be a set that we constructed just for this play. I hope you're all able to see it. And I'm grateful, Jim, for your time. I know that what Iliad takes out of you is a lot. If Brenda describing you when you get home after a day of rehearsal. So if those in our audience haven't seen an Iliad in our earlier production, which I think was in 15, maybe 2015, 2016. It's reimagined because we are very different people. You're a very different human. The world is a different world. And this play is beautifully adaptive to the moment. And it's an extraordinary tour de force. 2-person show, I should say, because we have Alicia Storin, who's a wonderful musician, cellist who plays the muse. And that's coming up.
Yeah, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm very grateful. In the Q&A, we also have listed Jimmy's website. So if you want to take a look, both of a picture of Jimmy holding a big fish as a young man, and it'll give you access to the rest of his vast store of writing. Grateful to you, Jim.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank
Miss you all. See you.
Yeah, let's do this in person sometime, hey?
Yeah. Bye-bye, Carey. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Jimmy. Have a beautiful day.